All right, welcome to this explainer. Today we are diving into a literal high-stakes geopolitical thriller that brought Florida into the United States. I am so incredibly excited to share this one with you because we're looking at a deal that fundamentally reshaped the map of North America. And the crazy part? It wasn't accomplished with massive armies or total war. Instead, it was pulled off through a masterstroke of diplomacy and some seriously clever debt reshuffling. Let's get right into it.
So, let's start with a quick thought experiment. Imagine waking up tomorrow to find out that an entire coastal state just wasn't American territory. Think about the shape of the United States right now without that iconic peninsula jetting out into the ocean. It's kind of hard to picture, right?
Because in that alternate reality, our modern world looks vastly different. We're talking about a reality with no iconic theme parks in Orlando, no vibrant, world-famous culture in Miami, no Key West, and absolutely no launching pads at the Kennedy Space Center, sending humans to the moon. It's a completely different timeline. But the thing is, back in the early 1800s, that alternate reality was the actual map.
Okay, Section 1. The missing state.
Now, following the 1803 Louisiana Purchase, the United States was growing at a staggering pace. Almost overnight, the country doubled in size. Yet, there was this glaring, massive omission right in the southeast corner. To a casual observer, Florida might have just seemed like a total wasteland. I mean, it was largely impenetrable swamps, dense forests, and just incredibly difficult terrain. But for the people actually in power, it was a massive strategic chokehold. It controlled vital access to the Gulf of Mexico, and its coastline watched over absolutely critical shipping routes. For Spain, who owned it at the time, it served as this protective barrier against American expansion. But for U.S. President James Monroe, having this foreign territory right there became an impossible situation to ignore.
Which brings us to Section 2. The Florida border crisis.
You know, friction is pretty much inevitable when you have two very different empires bumping up against each other without a clear, strictly enforced boundary. On one side of the line, you had a rapidly expanding, highly ambitious young America, deeply frustrated by cross-border incursions that they felt powerless to stop. And on the other side, a fading Spanish Empire. They were dealing with revolutions breaking out all across Latin America, their economy was totally exhausted from years of conflict, and they simply lacked the money and military strength to maintain any sort of real order in their distant colonies.
So, because Spain was so strapped for cash and troops, it created a massive power vacuum. It was honestly a recipe for chaos. Native American groups, particularly the Seminoles, were crossing freely back and forth across the border. The territory also became a safe haven for escaped enslaved people who sought refuge in Florida, where U.S. authorities legally couldn't pursue them. Add to that the mounting settler complaints of border raids, and you literally have a powder keg that Washington could no longer ignore. Spain had effectively lost complete control.
All right, Section 3. Jackson goes rogue.
When a border gets this volatile, and politicians in Washington are moving a bit too slowly, the military sometimes takes matters into its own hands. And to be fair, these tensions hadn't just exploded overnight, they had been steadily escalating for about 15 years. Following the Louisiana Purchase pushing American borders out, years of rising friction finally reached a boiling point in 1818, when General Andrew Jackson launched a shocking military campaign directly into foreign Spanish-owned territory.
Let's actually walk through these steps because they are genuinely wild. What was officially supposed to be a limited mission, just to stop border attacks, rapidly spiraled. I mean, Jackson didn't just patrol the border. Step 1, he enters to stop the attacks. Okay. But Step 2, his forces systematically start capturing Spanish forts. Step 3, he literally removes Spanish officials from power. And Step 4, he begins directly occupying parts of Florida. And the absolute kicker here, he did all of this without formal constitutional approval from Congress. It was a massive, completely unauthorized escalation. Unsurprisingly, Jackson's rogue actions created an immediate international crisis. Spain protested vehemently, as you would expect when your forts get captured by a neighboring general. But more than that, other European governments were watching this very carefully. They wanted to see what this aggressive young American nation would do next, and how Spain would retaliate. Suddenly, the United States was teetering on the absolute brink of an all-out war with the Spanish Empire.
That takes us to Section 4, the $5 million deal.
But the war didn't happen. Instead of firing cannons, a crumbling Spanish Empire made a very difficult, calculated decision. They looked at the writing on the wall and chose diplomacy. Following intense negotiations between Secretary of State John Quincy Adams and Spanish diplomat Luis de Onis, the Adams-Onis Treaty was officially signed on February 22, 1819.
It transferred Florida entirely to the United States for an accepted financial responsibility of up to $5 million. It was a monumental acquisition.
But here is the massive plot twist of this historical deal, and I absolutely love this part. Not a single cent of that $5 million was actually handed over to the Spanish government. None of it. There are no giant chests of gold loaded onto ships heading from Madrid. Instead, America creatively absorbed the debt of its own citizens. For years, U.S. citizens had these long-standing financial claims against Spain for various damages and seized property. So the U.S. government basically stepped in and said, look, we will pay our own citizens the $5 million you owe them, and in exchange, you give us Florida. It was a genius financial maneuver. It settled domestic complaints, and it gave the struggling Spanish Empire a graceful, bloodless exit from a territory they couldn't really hold on to anyway.
Finally, Section 5, changing the map forever.
This masterstroke of diplomacy forever altered the geopolitical landscape and the fundamental security of North America. For the first time in history, the United States had uninterrupted control of the entire Atlantic seaboard, all the way from Maine down to the southern tip of Florida. Furthermore, the treaty finally established a much-needed, clearer boundary line out west between American and Spanish lands. International tensions were instantly reduced, American security was significantly strengthened, and this massive new territory was officially opened up to waves of eager new settlers.
Fast forward to today. To put all of this into perspective, that once contested territory of swamps and border skirmishes is now home to over 23 million people. It boasts world-famous beaches, massive shipping ports, and a colossal tourism industry that draws people from all over the globe. All of that economic power and cultural significance traces straight back to a single diplomatic agreement signed over 2 centuries ago.
It perfectly captures the core takeaway of this entire story. Sometimes history isn't changed by the loudest explosions. Sometimes it's changed by a quiet negotiation inside a room filled with diplomats. It's incredible to think that all of this, the entire modern shape of the southeastern United States, wasn't won through a dramatic, cinematic battlefield victory. Rather, it was won through clever financial signatures on a treaty that quietly shaped the modern United States. Which leaves us with a final, fascinating question to ponder. When we look at borders on a map, we almost always assume they were carved out by armies. But as we've seen today, they are just as often drawn behind closed doors. So what other quiet rooms changed the map of the world as we know it today? Keep that in mind the next time you look at a globe. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and I will catch you in the next explainer.